Gallery 0. Welcome back, unfortunately. Welcome back to the garden. Yes, this one again. You were hoping for a gift shop, or at least a plaque explaining that things got complicated and everyone did their best. I regret to inform you that this is not that kind of garden. This is the version where we stop pretending we are surprised. Please take a moment to notice how familiar everything feels. The paths are worn in exactly the same places. The hedges are trimmed into shapes that suggest order without requiring it. The signs are still up. They just mean whatever is convenient today. You may notice people behaving badly in plain sight. This is not a glitch. This is the feature that survived every update. If you are wondering whether this is satire, that is understandable. Satire is comforting. Satire implies distance. Unfortunately, this is documentation wearing a novelty hat. Satire relies on novelty. It works because the exaggeration feels separate from everyday life. Once the behavior stops feeling exaggerated, satire loses its function. What remains is not humor, but record. When the same actions repeat often enough, they no longer read as commentary. They read as pattern. You may recognize the behavior immediately. That recognition is not evidence of familiarity. It is evidence of repetition. Cruelty does not need to hide anymore. It has been practiced long enough to feel normal. It appears in daylight. It introduces itself confidently. It expects cooperation, not scrutiny. You will notice how often harm is delivered plainly and defended aggressively. Not denied, defended. This distinction matters. Denial implies uncertainty. Defense implies entitlement. This garden no longer pretends its values are misunderstood. It insists they are correct. Loudness is treated as honesty. Confidence is mistaken for truth. Volume substitutes for justification. You may feel the urge to soften what you are seeing, to call it exaggeration, to treat it as performance. This impulse is familiar and very useful to the garden. It allows behavior to continue without challenge. This gallery exists to remove that reflex. Nothing here is satire. Nothing here is symbolic. These are not metaphors for something else. This is the culture as it functions when it no longer feels the need to explain itself. If you are uncomfortable already, that is not a failure of tone. It is an accurate response to proximity. The garden does not require belief. It requires participation. It runs on repetition, silence, and the assumption that someone else will intervene later. Later has already passed. This is where we begin. Please proceed. Gallery 1. They know what they are doing. This gallery addresses a misunderstanding that is very popular because it is very convenient. The misunderstanding is that poor behavior continues because people do not know any better. That explanation is no longer available. At some point, ignorance expires. It does not make a sound when it happens. There is no ceremony. One day you are confused. The next day you are informed. After that, you are choosing. This garden passed that point some time ago. You will hear people say, they don't realize how harmful this is. They do. You will hear, they don't understand the consequences. They understand them perfectly. They just do not apply them inward. You will hear, they're just reacting. Reaction does not explain consistency. Practice does. Notice how certain behaviors repeat with remarkable discipline. The same insults, the same targets, the same tone. Improvisation does not look like this. This is rehearsal. Cruelty has become efficient. It no longer wastes energy pretending to be confused. It does not trip over apologies. It does not require clarification. It arrives cleanly, lands, and waits for applause. And it receives it. You may also observe a strong allergy to accountability. When consequences appear, they are immediately reframed as persecution. When harm is named, it is dismissed as exaggeration. When patterns are pointed out, they are called obsession. This is not confusion. This is defense. People who know they are behaving badly do not argue the behavior. They argue the right to continue. They will say, everyone does it. They will say, it's not that serious. They will say, you're worse. None of these are denials. They are permissions. The joke at this stage is not that the behavior is cruel. The joke is that anyone still pretends this is accidental. Please move on. Gallery 2. Bullying as culture. At some point, behavior stops being an individual failing and becomes a shared language. This is that point. Bullying is no longer something that happens here. It is something that identifies you as belonging here. Cruelty has been streamlined. It is no longer impulsive. It is no longer sloppy. It follows recognizable patterns, the same phrases, the same gestures, the same targets, the same rhythm. This is not chaos. This is coordination. You may notice how often harm is described as humor, even when no one is laughing. This is not a mistake. Labeling something a joke is a way to avoid defending it. Jokes are not meant to be examined. They are meant to pass through quickly and leave no record. In this garden, jokes linger. They are repeated, refined, improved, shared. They travel well because they require very little context. They rely on hierarchy. You either understand why it is funny, or you are why it is funny. Bullying works best when it feels social, when it feels communal, when participation requires only a smile or silence. Very little effort is needed. That is why it spreads so easily. You may hear people say, it's just banter. This is an interesting word. Banter implies consent. It implies equality. It implies the ability to leave without penalty. None of those conditions apply here. The targets are consistent. The power imbalance is obvious. The consequences are real. What has changed is not the behavior. What has changed is the reaction to it. Discomfort is mocked. Objection is framed as fragility. Refusal to participate is interpreted as hostility. Silence is interpreted as agreement. This is how bullying becomes ambient. It does not need enforcement. It does not need instruction. It sustains itself through repetition and reward. The garden rewards those who perform it well, loudly, publicly, without hesitation. It punishes those who hesitate, not with exile, with ridicule, with dismissal, with being made small. You may still hear people insist this is strength, that toughness requires it, that this is how the world works. That is not a description of reality. It is a justification for behavior that benefits a few and wounds many. At this stage, the humor has mostly drained away. What remains is structure. Structure is harder to laugh off. Please continue. Gallery 3. Might is right. This is the point where the culture stops pretending it is misunderstood. Here, power no longer asks to be liked. It asks to be obeyed. You may notice that arguments have thinned out. Evidence appears less often. Explanations feel shorter. This is not intellectual decline, it is efficiency. When power is confident, it stops justifying itself. The psychology here is simple and deeply human. When people feel threatened, confused, or diminished, they look for certainty. Not truth, certainty. Truth requires patience. Certainty arrives loudly and does not ask questions. Might offers certainty. It promises safety through dominance. It promises clarity through force. It replaces complexity with hierarchy. Up, down. Strong, weak. Us, them. Once that frame is accepted, everything else follows naturally. Empathy becomes a liability. Doubt becomes disloyalty. Nuance becomes weakness. This is not accidental. It is a learned response. People raised in environments where power is admired over fairness begin to associate authority with volume and confidence rather than accuracy. They confuse decisiveness with competence. They reward those who act without hesitation, even when the action is wrong. Especially when the action is wrong. Because cruelty signals strength in a system that equates dominance with survival. You may notice how often harm is excused as necessary. Necessary for order. Necessary for winning. Necessary to keep things from getting worse. This framing is powerful because it turns objection into irresponsibility. If harm is necessary, then resistance becomes selfish. This is how cultures recruit compliance. You will also notice a deep discomfort with accountability here. Accountability implies equality. It suggests that rules apply upward as well as downward. In a might-based system, this is intolerable. Rules are tools, not principles. They are enforced selectively, rigidly against outsiders, flexibly for insiders. When this inconsistency is pointed out, it is dismissed as persecution. Power does not see itself as bound. It sees itself as entitled. Psychologically, this creates a closed loop. The more power is exercised without consequence, the more justified it feels. The absence of punishment is taken as proof of correctness. Survival is interpreted as validation. I'm still here becomes, I was right. This is how moral reasoning erodes. Instead of asking, was this right? The question becomes, did it work? And then, eventually, did it benefit me? Children watching this learn quickly. They learn that strength is not about protection, but about permission. They learn that winning absolves behavior. They learn that kindness is optional and accountability is for losers. They also learn that fear works. Fear shortens thought. It narrows attention. It makes simple stories feel true and complex ones feel suspicious. A frightened mind does not ask whether something is fair. It asks whether it is safe. And safety, in this garden, is offered by those who promise to hurt the right people. You may still hear claims that this is realism, that the world is harsh and this is just honesty about it. This is another convenience. The world is harsh, yes, but cruelty is not realism. It is a strategy, and like all strategies, it benefits some and costs others. What is new here is not the existence of power. What is new is the pride taken in its misuse. The jokes are gone now. There is nothing left to soften the edges. Power has stopped pretending it is funny. Please move on. Gallery 4. The Bad Guys. There is a lie told about this garden that needs to be put down carefully and permanently. The lie is that something changed, that this cruelty is new, that the indifference is a recent corruption, that the garden was once gentle and then went wrong. It was always like this. This garden has never been interested in individual health unless that health was profitable. It has never protected people because they were vulnerable. It has protected them when doing so was convenient, or when the cost of not protecting them became embarrassing. Suffering has always been acceptable here, as long as it was unevenly distributed. The difference now is not the values. The difference is the honesty. You may hear people talk about freedom in this garden. They say the word often, they say it loudly. They say it as if repetition improves definition. It does not. Freedom here does not mean safety. It does not mean dignity. It does not mean protection from harm. Freedom here means the absence of obligation. It means the freedom to ignore consequences, the freedom to externalize cost, the freedom to benefit while someone else absorbs the damage. In other gardens, freedom is tied to responsibility. It is understood as a balance. Your liberty ends where another person's harm begins. That is not the meaning used here. Here, freedom is a shield word. A word that ends conversations. A word that justifies harm by pretending it is neutrality. I am free becomes I am not accountable. This garden has always preferred outcomes over people. It measures success in scale, not care. Growth is admired. Stability is optional. Collapse is acceptable, provided it happens to someone else first. When individuals are injured by this system, they are treated as unfortunate edge cases. Statistical noise, acceptable loss. The cruelty is not a malfunction. It is a cost calculation, and many people benefit from it. This is the part that is often skipped because it is uncomfortable and because it implicates enjoyment. There are people here who like this garden exactly as it is. They like the hierarchy. They like the permission. They like that empathy has become optional. They like that dominance is admired again. They are not confused. They are not manipulated. They are not victims of misinformation who will wake up if spoken to gently. They are beneficiaries. They enjoy the reduction of complexity because it places them on the correct side of it. They enjoy the cruelty because it reassures them they are not the target. They enjoy the noise because it drowns out reflection. They are not waiting to be convinced. They are waiting to win. This is why the culture has become so openly defensive. Not because it fears being wrong, but because it fears losing. Morality here is not a standard. It is a scorecard. As long as power is held, behavior is justified. As long as dominance persists, cruelty is reframed as toughness. As long as victories continue, harm is dismissed as necessary collateral. This culture understands one thing very clearly. You are only the bad guys once you lose. Before that, you are realists. You are truth tellers. You are strong. You are doing what needs to be done. History does not judge behavior in real time. It judges outcomes after power shifts. And this culture knows that. It knows that morality is often applied retroactively once consequences arrive. That is why there is such desperation to maintain dominance, not just for resources or control, but for narrative immunity. As long as they are winning, they get to define what winning means. This is not ignorance. This is strategy. And the garden is very comfortable with it. Please continue. Gallery 5. No neutral ground. There is no neutrality left in this garden. That time passed quietly while people congratulated themselves for staying reasonable. Neutrality is only possible when harm is hypothetical, when consequences are distant, when no one is being actively pushed down so others can stand taller. That is not the condition here. In this garden, choosing not to act is not restraint. It is assistance. Silence does not slow harm. It clears a path for it. Politeness does not moderate cruelty. It signals permission. Waiting for certainty does not protect you from responsibility. It ensures you arrive too late to matter. You will hear people say, "I don't agree with it, but..." The sentence ends there. Everything after the word "but" is cooperation. You will hear, "I'm just staying out of it." No one stays out of a system they benefit from. You are either absorbing cost or exporting it. There is no third position. You will hear, "Both sides are bad." This is not wisdom. It is abdication. It treats harm and objection as morally equivalent so the speaker does not have to choose. This garden survives on that refusal. Aggression here is not a response. It is a strategy. It is deployed deliberately to make engagement exhausting, to make correction costly, to make resistance feel futile. When cruelty is met with outrage, the outrage is mocked. When it is met with reason, the reason is ignored. When it is met with silence, it advances. There is no correct tone that stops it. This is intentional. The culture has learned that escalation works, that volume overwhelms scrutiny, that aggression shifts the burden of response onto the person being harmed. The more brutal the behavior, the more energy it takes to oppose it. That asymmetry is the point. Neutrality does not exist inside that equation. It only exists for those who are not being targeted yet. And yet is doing a great deal of work here. You may tell yourself you are not responsible because you did not start this, that you did not vote for it, cheer for it, ask for it. That is not the measure. The measure is whether you benefit from it continuing. If your comfort increases as others are stripped of theirs, you are not neutral. If your safety is preserved because attention is diverted elsewhere, you are not neutral. If you are allowed to disengage because the harm is not directed at you, you are not neutral. You are insulated. And insulation is not innocence. This garden depends on people who know something is wrong, but decide it is not their problem. It depends on people who mistake disengagement for virtue, who believe that not choosing is a form of moral cleanliness. It is not. Not choosing is how systems like this persist without resistance. Not choosing is how cruelty becomes routine. Not choosing is how power learns it will not be challenged. There are no bystanders here, only participants with varying levels of honesty. If you are waiting for a moment when neutrality becomes impossible, you have misunderstood how this works. That moment has already passed. It passed quietly, while people were still debating tone. This gallery exists to remove that illusion. There is no neutral ground in a culture that openly rewards harm. There is only alignment and consequence. And pretending otherwise is not caution. It is collaboration. Please continue. Gallery 6. The self that stays. At a certain point, harm stops being something people do and becomes something they are. This is not because they forgot how to care. It is simply because caring became incompatible with belonging. In this garden, cruelty is no longer a tactic. It is a badge, a signal, a way of saying, I am still here, I am still safe, I am still on the right side of power. People do not merely tolerate the behavior now, they incorporate it. They adjust their self-image around it. They begin to describe themselves as blunt, as honest, as unfiltered, as real. These are not descriptions. They are justifications. When a culture rewards harm consistently enough, people adapt by rewriting their internal story. They stop asking whether something is right and start asking whether it fits. Fits the group, fits the tone, fits the moment. This is how identity replaces ethics. You will notice how quickly people become defensive when this is pointed out. Not angry, not confused, defensive. Because the criticism no longer threatens an action. It threatens a self-concept. To say, this is cruel, is now heard as, you are cruel. And that cannot be allowed. So the behavior is defended not because it is good, but because abandoning it would require admission. Admission that harm was chosen. Admission that benefit was enjoyed. Admission that identity was built around something rotten. Most people will protect their self-image at almost any cost. This is why apologies vanish. Not because people do not understand harm, but because apology fractures the story they tell themselves about who they are. Repair requires humility. Humility requires lowering status. And lowering status in this garden is dangerous. So people stay. They stay louder, harder, and more extreme than they started. Not because they believe more deeply, but because retreat feels like annihilation. This is the trap. Once cruelty becomes identity, leaving feels like death. The culture does not need to police itself anymore. People self-enforce. They double down. They escalate. They compete to prove they belong. The cruelty intensifies not because it is effective, but because it is clarifying. It tells everyone exactly who is still inside. This is how entire communities normalize behavior they would once have found unrecognizable. Not through persuasion, but through alignment pressure. Through the quiet terror of being seen as weak, disloyal, or expendable. People do not ask, is this wrong? They ask, what happens to me if I say so? And that question answers itself. This is the point of no return for many. Not because change is impossible, but because the psychological cost of change has been made unbearable. They are not confused. They are not ignorant. They are not victims of manipulation. They are people who discovered that cruelty keeps them safe and decided that was enough. This is not radicalization. It is adaptation. And adaptations that reward harm do not reverse themselves. Please continue. Gallery 7. Refusal. Refusal does not arrive loudly. It does not kick the door in. It does not announce itself with a slogan. It does not feel powerful when you do it. Refusal feels small. It feels like not laughing when you are expected to, like deciding not to repeat something that would have earned you approval. Refusal is the moment you realize that participation is optional, but comfort was the reward for pretending it wasn't. In this garden, refusal is treated as aggression. You will be told you are being difficult. You will be told you are overreacting. You will be told you are making things worse by noticing them. This is because refusal disrupts the economy. Cruelty here depends on circulation. It must be shared, echoed, reinforced. It needs laughter. It needs repetition. It needs ordinary people to keep the machinery warm by doing nothing remarkable at all. Refusal starves it. You are not expected to overthrow anything. You are expected to comply quietly, to keep things moving, to keep things smooth, to keep the harm from becoming awkward. Refusal is awkward. It breaks the rhythm. It introduces friction. It forces a moment where someone has to decide whether to escalate or retreat. And escalation is expensive when there is no applause. This is why refusal is punished. Not always openly, often socially, through withdrawal, through exclusion, through the gentle suggestion that you are no longer fun, no longer easy, no longer safe to stand next to. The garden prefers enthusiasm, but it will accept silence. What it cannot tolerate is disengagement that is visible. Refusal does not claim moral superiority. It does not require purity. It does not demand agreement. It only insists on one thing. I will not help you do this. This is where resistance actually begins. Not with certainty, not with courage. With boundaries that do not negotiate themselves away for convenience. Refusal is not heroic. It is repetitive. You have to do it again the next day, and the next. Without the satisfaction of seeing immediate change, most people give up here. Not because they are weak, but because they were promised that doing the right thing would feel better than this. It does not. Refusal feels like loss before it feels like progress. Loss of ease, loss of belonging, loss of the comfortable lie that staying quiet keeps you clean. It does not. Refusal does not make you innocent. It makes you exposed. And exposure is the price of withdrawing consent from a system that runs on your silence. This gallery exists to say this plainly. Nothing changes until someone refuses to continue as normal. Nothing collapses all at once, but something shifts. And once that shift begins, it is very difficult to reverse. Please continue. Gallery 8. Pressure. Pressure is what refusal becomes when it is repeated. Not louder, not cleaner, heavier. Pressure is not agreement. It does not require unity of belief or tone. It does not ask everyone to be brave at once. It accumulates because people stop absorbing harm quietly. Pressure forms when systems lose compliance. When rules are followed selectively and questioned consistently. When legitimacy thins. When silence stops being available as a resource. This is not a moral event. It is a logistical one. Power persists because it is cheap to maintain. It is fed by routine participation, by people doing what they are told because that is easier than interrupting the flow. Pressure raises the cost. Institutions notice when cooperation frays, when enforcement requires effort, when every decision carries friction instead of momentum, when justification becomes work instead of reflex. This is why pressure is met with backlash, not because it is wrong, but because it is effective. You will see intimidation tactics, smear tactics, exhaustion tactics, sudden concern for decorum, accusations of chaos, warnings about instability. These are not signs of strength. They are signs that the cost curve is shifting. Pressure does not look righteous. It looks inconvenient. It is people documenting instead of forgetting, withholding instead of applauding, walking away instead of smoothing things over. It is slow. It is uneven. It is often boring. That is why it works. Pressure does not need to convince everyone. It only needs to make harm expensive enough that continuation requires sacrifice. Not moral sacrifice, practical sacrifice. Time, energy, credibility, control. This is how cultures change when belief does not. There will be no moment where everyone agrees. There will be no clean narrative. There will be no applause line marking the turn. There will only be resistance that refuses to be absorbed and power that finds itself spending more than it expected. This gallery exists to remove a comforting myth. Change does not arrive because people finally understand. It arrives because harm stops being subsidized. Pressure is what remains when hope is not a feeling but a function. Please continue. Final gallery. No alibi. This is where the explanations end. Not because there is nothing left to explain, but because explanation has been used long enough as cover. You know what this is now. You know how it works. You know who benefits. You know who pays. You know what silence does. You know what refusal costs. From this point forward, confusion is no longer credible. There is no alibi for compliance. Not, I didn't start it. Not, I was just following the rules. Not, I had no choice. Not, it's complicated. Not, someone else should handle it. Complexity does not erase responsibility. Fear does not convert harm into necessity. Comfort does not excuse participation. You do not need to believe anything to be accountable. You only need to continue. Evil does not require conviction. It requires permission, and permission is given every time harm is treated as tolerable, every time cruelty is waved through because confronting it would be inconvenient, every time silence is chosen because resistance would be costly. This culture did not survive because everyone agreed with it. It survived because enough people decided the price of opposing it was too high. That decision is the only thing being judged here, not your thoughts, not your feelings, your actions, your inaction. History is not confused about moments like this. It does not ask what people intended. It asks what they allowed, what they defended, and what they continued to benefit from while knowing better. This is not a call to purity. It is not a demand for heroism. It is a statement of fact. Once you know, you are involved. Once you benefit, you are implicated. Once you continue, you have chosen. There is no alibi for compliance. The garden does not close. The path does not disappear. You leave carrying whatever you decided was acceptable. That is all.